History remembers her as a seductress, a femme fatale who brought Roman generals to their knees. But that is a narrative written by her enemies, a simplification of one of the most brilliant political minds of the ancient world. The true story of Cleopatra VII is not one of seduction, but of survival. It is the story of the last pharaoh, a queen who gambled everything against the overwhelming power of Rome, in a desperate, high-stakes game to preserve a dynasty and a civilization that had stood for 3,000 years. To understand her gambles, we must first understand the weak hand she was dealt. The Ptolemaic Egypt she inherited was a kingdom in name only. It was a Greek dynasty ruling over a native Egyptian population that often viewed them as foreign occupiers. For generations, her family had been embroiled in vicious cycles of incest, assassination, and civil war. More importantly, the kingdom was effectively bankrupt, deeply in debt to Roman bankers, and politically a client state of the ever-expanding Roman Republic. Egypt's vast wealth in grain made it a strategic prize, but its political independence was an illusion. Cleopatra did not inherit a stable throne. She inherited a gilded cage, and Rome held the key. Her reign began, as it would end, in crisis. She ascended to the throne not alone, but as co-ruler with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. In the cutthroat world of the Ptolemaic court, this was not a partnership. It was a death sentence waiting to happen. Pushed out by a cabal of powerful courtiers who controlled her brother, Cleopatra was driven into exile, a queen without a kingdom. Her chance came in 48 BC, when the Roman Civil War arrived at her doorstep. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, landed in Alexandria in pursuit of his rival, Pompey. While her brother's court fumbled, Cleopatra saw her moment. Knowing she could not approach Caesar through official channels, she made one of the boldest moves in history. She had herself rolled into a carpet and smuggled into the private quarters of the Roman dictator. This was not merely the act of a desperate woman, it was a calculated political statement. She bypassed the corrupt intermediaries and presented herself directly to power, a queen demanding to be recognized. Caesar, a man who admired audacity, was impressed. The Roman historian Plutarch tells us that it was not her beauty alone that captivated Caesar. He wrote that her looks were not altogether incomparable, but it was the charm of her conversation, the wit of her arguments, and the irresistible quality of her voice that were truly spellbinding. She was a scholar who spoke at least 9 languages fluently, a mathematician, a chemist, and a brilliant strategist. She did not seduce Caesar with looks alone. She captivated him with her mind. He intervened in the Egyptian civil war, and with the backing of his legions, Cleopatra was restored to her throne. Their relationship was more than political. They became lovers, and she bore him a son, Caesarion. She then took another gamble, traveling to Rome itself and living in a luxurious villa. Here, she held court not as a subject, but as a foreign Hellenistic monarch. Her intelligence and exoticism fascinated some, but horrified the conservative Roman elite. The great orator Cicero wrote of her with disdain, viewing her as a symbol of the very monarchical ambition he feared in Caesar. When Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March in 44 BC, Cleopatra's position became instantly precarious. Her gamble had failed. She fled back to Egypt, her Roman protection gone. Upon her return to Alexandria, Cleopatra acted not as a grieving lover, but as a ruthless politician. The political situation was still unstable, and her younger brother, now Ptolemy XIV, was a potential rival. Shortly after her return, he died mysteriously, very likely poisoned on her orders. With him out of the way, she solidified her power by elevating her infant son, Caesarion, to the status of co-ruler. This was a masterstroke. It secured her own position and presented a direct, living link to the legacy of the great Julius Caesar. She was no longer just a client queen. She was the mother of a potential Roman heir. Once again, Rome's chaos provided her with an opportunity. In the power vacuum that followed, Caesar's loyal general, Mark Antony, emerged as the ruler of the eastern half of the Roman world. He summoned the Queen of Egypt to Tarsus. Cleopatra, understanding the power of spectacle, did not arrive as a supplicant. She sailed up the river Cydnus in a magnificent golden barge with purple sails and silver oars, rowed to the sound of flutes and lyres. She herself was dressed as the goddess Venus, reclining under a golden canopy, fanned by boys dressed as cupids. The entire city emptied to witness the spectacle. Antony, a man of legendary appetites, was left waiting alone in the marketplace. He was enchanted. They formed an alliance that was both a passionate romance and a formidable political partnership. For nearly a decade, they ruled the East from Alexandria. A central part of their shared ambition was Antony's disastrous Parthian campaign. Eager to match Caesar's military glory, Antony amassed a huge army, financed almost entirely by Cleopatra's Egyptian treasury, to invade the Parthian Empire. Cleopatra's gamble was immense. If he won, their joint power would be unassailable. But the campaign was a catastrophe. The Roman legions were decimated in the harsh Armenian mountains. Antony returned to Cleopatra not as a conqueror, but as a defeated general, his reputation in tatters and his army destroyed. He was now more dependent on her wealth and support than ever before. Their ambition reached its peak in 34 BC. At a bizarre public ceremony known as the Donations of Alexandria. Dressed as gods, Antony and Cleopatra sat on golden thrones. Antony declared Caesarion to be Caesar's true son and legal heir, a direct challenge to his rival Octavian, who was Caesar's adopted son. He then granted vast swaths of Roman territory in the east to his own children with Cleopatra. To the world, and especially to Rome, this was an outrageous act. It was the final piece of evidence Octavian needed for his propaganda war. Back in Rome, Caesar's calculating grandnephew, Octavian, saw this partnership as a direct threat. He brilliantly painted Antony as a weak Roman general, bewitched by a foreign queen. He portrayed Cleopatra as a decadent, power-hungry serpent who used witchcraft and sex to corrupt Roman virtue, and whose ultimate goal was to move the capital of the empire from Rome to Alexandria. He read Antony's stolen will to the Roman Senate, revealing his plans to be buried in Egypt with his queen, an act of ultimate betrayal. Octavian was not just fighting for power. He was framing the conflict as a defense of Roman civilization itself against a foreign menace. The final confrontation came at the naval battle of Actium in 31 BC. In a disastrous turn of events, the fleet of Antony and Cleopatra was decisively defeated. The pair fled back to Egypt, their armies shattered, their dream of an Eastern empire destroyed. Octavian's legions invaded Egypt, meeting little resistance. Antony, on receiving a false report of Cleopatra's death, took his own life. Cleopatra, cornered in her mausoleum, saw her fate. Before the end, she had one final, tense meeting with the victor, Octavian. She attempted to use the same charm and intelligence that had won over Caesar and Antony, but she found no purchase. Octavian was cold, calculating, and immune to her influence. He wanted only one thing: to parade her through the streets of Rome in chains, the ultimate humiliation for a queen and a living goddess. Realizing there was no escape, she chose her own end. According to legend, she had an asp, a venomous serpent, and a symbol of divine royalty, smuggled to her in a basket of figs. Her death was her final act of defiance, a last successful gamble to deny her enemy his ultimate victory. The last pharaoh of Egypt was dead, and with her, the 3,000-year-old civilization of the Nile became a province of Rome. And that is the architecture of the reign of Cleopatra. Remember, history is more than a story. It's a code, and there is always another layer to decrypt. Subscribe and continue the investigation with us.